The words cut through the morning air like a blade. She won't last 5 miles. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried across the training ground, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. The other recruits exchanged knowing glances, some smirking, others shaking their heads in what looked like pity. Maya Chen stood motionless, her slight frame dwarfed by the towering soldiers around her, sweat already beading on her forehead despite the cool dawn temperature. Her breathing was steady, controlled, but her eyes remained fixed on the horizon beyond the fence line. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mockery had started the moment Maya arrived at Fort Blackwater 3 weeks ago. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 120 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a military base. Her delicate features and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for ridicule among the hardened Special Forces candidates who had been training for months. The other recruits had nicknames for her that they thought she couldn't hear. "Glass bones," whispered Sergeant Mitchell during equipment checks. "Paper lungs," muttered Private Jackson when she struggled with the weighted pack exercises. But there was something about Maya that didn't quite fit the narrative they had constructed around her. While the others complained loudly about the difficulty of their training regimen, she endured it in absolute silence. When they collapsed after runs, gasping and cursing, she would sit quietly on the ground, her chest rising and falling in measured rhythms, her dark eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that seemed almost meditative. Her hands, small and seemingly fragile, bore calluses that spoke of years of hard work, though no one bothered to look closely enough to notice. The commanding officer of their unit, Colonel Sarah Hendricks, had been watching Maya with growing concern. Not because of any disciplinary issues or poor performance, but because something about the young woman's file didn't add up. Her physical fitness scores from basic training were average at best, her endurance times placing her consistently in the bottom third of her cohort. Yet here she was, somehow having qualified for one of the most grueling special operations programs in the military. Her background check revealed a quiet life in rural Oregon, working on her family's small farm, no competitive sports history, no marathon running experience, nothing that would explain her presence among these elite candidates. What Colonel Hendricks found most puzzling was the gap in Maya's records. There were 6 months missing from her timeline, a period between leaving college and enlisting that was marked simply as personal leave. When pressed about it during her initial interview, Maya had given a vague response about helping with family obligations, her voice soft but steady, her eyes never wavering from the colonel's gaze. Something about that look had made Hendricks decide not to push further, though she couldn't quite articulate why. The training at Fort Blackwater was designed to break people. The philosophy was simple: put candidates through such extreme physical and mental stress that only the truly exceptional would emerge. The daily routine began at 4:30 in the morning with a 5-mile run in full gear, followed by weapons training, tactical exercises, obstacle courses, and combat simulations that often lasted until well after dark. The dropout rate was typically 60% within the first month, and the instructors took a certain pride in identifying the weak links early and weeding them out with ruthless efficiency. Maya had somehow survived the initial cuts, but just barely. During the morning runs, she consistently finished in the back half of the group, her face flushed red with exertion, her breathing labored. The obstacle courses were a particular struggle for her. Where the larger recruits could muscle their way over walls and through barriers, Maya had to rely on technique and determination, often taking twice as long to complete the same challenges. Her performance in combat simulations was competent but unremarkable, her small stature making it difficult for her to keep up with the more physically imposing candidates. The other recruits had quickly dismissed her as dead weight, someone who would wash out within days. Private Derek Thompson, a former college football player whose massive frame made him a natural leader among the group, had taken to making jokes about Maya's presence during their brief rest periods. "I don't get why they even let her try," he would say, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't about being politically correct. People's lives depend on us being the best." Thompson's comments were always followed by nods of agreement from the others. They had all sacrificed enormously to get to this point, pushing their bodies and minds to their absolute limits, and the idea that someone might be given special consideration because of their gender or background was infuriating to them. They saw Maya as a symbol of everything that was wrong with modern military policies, a diversity checkbox that was taking up space that should have gone to someone more deserving. But Maya never responded to their taunts. She never defended herself, never argued, never showed any sign that their words affected her. She would simply continue with whatever task was at hand, her expression calm and focused, as if she existed in a bubble that their negativity couldn't penetrate. This only seemed to frustrate them more. Thompson, in particular, began to escalate his harassment, hoping to provoke some kind of reaction that would give the instructors a reason to dismiss her. During one particularly brutal training exercise involving a 12-mile march with 60-pound packs, Thompson deliberately knocked into Maya as they navigated a narrow mountain path, sending her stumbling toward the edge of a steep embankment. She managed to regain her balance at the last second, but not before her pack shifted awkwardly, throwing off her center of gravity for the remainder of the march. She finished nearly an hour behind the rest of the group, her face pale with exhaustion. But she finished. The incident should have been reported, but Maya said nothing about it. When Instructor Davis asked her why she had fallen so far behind, she simply said she had lost her footing on loose rocks. Thompson smirked from across the formation, expecting to see some sign of defeat in her eyes, but Maya's expression remained as calm and determined as ever. If anything, there seemed to be a new quality in her gaze, a depth that hadn't been there before, as if something had shifted inside her during that long, solitary march. Colonel Hendricks began to pay closer attention to Maya after that incident. There was something about the young woman's resilience that reminded her of her own early days in the military, when she had faced similar challenges as one of the few women in her unit. But Maya's situation was different. She wasn't just facing gender bias. She was genuinely struggling with the physical demands of the program in ways that Hendricks had never experienced. Yet somehow, she kept pushing forward. The colonel decided to review Maya's file more carefully, looking for clues that might explain her persistence. What she found was a young woman who had grown up in a family that valued hard work and quiet determination above all else. Maya's father was a third-generation farmer who had managed to keep their small operation running through economic downturns and natural disasters that had forced many of their neighbors to sell. Her mother was a nurse who had worked double shifts for years to help support the family while raising 4 children. Maya was the youngest and the only daughter, raised alongside 3 older brothers who had all followed different paths, one becoming a teacher, another a mechanic, and the third joining the Coast Guard. The family's values seemed to center around the idea that actions spoke louder than words, that true strength came from enduring hardship without complaint, and that giving up was simply not an option. Maya's high school teachers described her as incredibly dedicated, but never boastful about her achievements. She had graduated near the top of her class, not because she was naturally brilliant, but because she was willing to outwork everyone around her. Her college professors painted a similar picture, a student who might not grasp concepts immediately, but who would persist until she mastered them completely. But it was the missing 6 months that continued to puzzle Colonel Hendricks. Maya's enlistment papers showed that she had completed 3 years of college, studying environmental science, before taking what she called personal leave, and then enlisting in the military. The timeline suggested that something significant had happened during that period, something that had changed her life trajectory entirely. When Hendricks tried to dig deeper, she found that Maya had been completely off the grid during those months. No social media activity, no credit card transactions, no digital footprint whatsoever. The only clue was a brief notation in Maya's medical file about a knee injury that had been treated at a clinic in Montana, nearly 200 miles from her family's farm in Oregon. The injury was described as consistent with overuse, the kind of repetitive strain that might result from excessive running or hiking. But the timing was odd. The treatment had occurred during what should have been Maya's winter break from college, when most students would be taking time off from physical activities. As the weeks passed, Maya continued to struggle with the training program, but she also continued to survive each round of cuts. Her times on the morning runs showed gradual improvement, though she was still consistently among the slower finishers. Her performance on the obstacle courses became more efficient, if not necessarily faster. Most importantly, she never missed a day, never complained, never showed any sign of wanting to quit. The other recruits began to grudgingly respect her persistence, even as they remained convinced that she didn't belong in the program. Private Lisa Santos, one of only 3 women in the cohort, and someone who had initially been sympathetic to Maya's struggles, found herself growing frustrated with what she saw as Maya's stubborn refusal to acknowledge her own limitations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Look, I get it," Santos said to Maya one evening as they cleaned their weapons after a long day of training. "You want to prove that you can do this. But sometimes knowing when you're beat is just as important as fighting through the pain. There's no shame in recognizing that this program isn't for everyone." Maya looked up from the rifle she was meticulously cleaning, her dark eyes meeting Santos's gaze. For a moment, it seemed like she might actually respond with more than her usual quiet acknowledgement, but instead, she simply nodded and returned to her work, her movements precise and methodical. Santos shook her head and walked away, convinced that Maya was either too proud or too naive to understand the reality of her situation. But Maya understood more than anyone realized. She had been observing her fellow recruits as carefully as they had been judging her, noting their strengths and weaknesses, their motivations and fears. Thompson's aggressive behavior, she recognized, came from his own insecurity about maintaining his position as the group's unofficial leader. Santos's frustration stemmed from her fear that Maya's eventual failure would reflect poorly on all the women in the program. The instructor's apparent indifference to the harassment she faced was actually a calculated test, a way of measuring not just her physical resilience, but her mental toughness as well. Most importantly, Maya knew something that none of them suspected, something about those missing 6 months that would have changed everything if they had known the truth. But that truth was buried so deeply, protected by such carefully constructed barriers, that it might as well have been a state secret. The medical files from Montana told only a fraction of the story. The real story involved a remote wilderness area, a chance encounter, and a test of endurance that had pushed her far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. During her 3rd year of college, Maya had been conducting research for her environmental science thesis on the impact of climate change on high-altitude ecosystems. The work required her to spend time in remote mountain areas, taking measurements and collecting samples in conditions that most people would consider harsh and unforgiving. She had always been drawn to solitude and physical challenges, finding peace in the rhythm of long hikes and the clarity that came from pushing her body to its limits. It was during one of these research trips that Maya had encountered someone who would change the course of her life entirely. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a former Olympic marathon runner who had disappeared from competitive racing after a controversial doping scandal that had destroyed her career and reputation. For years, she had lived as a virtual hermit in the remote wilderness of Montana, running hundreds of miles each week through terrain that would challenge the most experienced mountaineers. Maya had literally stumbled upon Dr. Vasquez during a snowstorm that had caught her unprepared while she was collecting samples near a remote weather station. Exhausted and hypothermic, Maya had been on the verge of collapse when the older woman appeared seemingly out of nowhere, moving through the blizzard with an almost supernatural grace and speed. Dr. Vasquez had guided Maya to a small cabin hidden deep in the mountains, a place that existed completely off any official maps or records. The cabin was spartanly furnished, but equipped with everything necessary for survival in the harsh mountain environment. Dr. Vasquez had saved Maya's life, but the rescue came with an unexpected offer. The older woman had been living alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like to have human companionship. Maya's quiet determination and obvious love of the wilderness reminded Drive Vasquez of her own younger self before fame and competition had corrupted her passion for running. Dr. Vasquez proposed a trade. Maya could stay at the cabin for as long as she needed to complete her research, and in return she would train with the older woman, learning techniques and strategies that had once made Dr. Vasquez one of the greatest endurance athletes in the world. It was an opportunity that would have been impossible to arrange through any official channels, given Dr. Vasquez's exile from the athletic community. Maya had originally planned to stay for only a few weeks, but those weeks stretched into months, as she found herself drawn deeper into a training regimen that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Dr. Vasquez's methods were based not on the conventional wisdom of sports science, but on ancient techniques that emphasized mental discipline and spiritual connection to the natural world. The training involved running distances that seemed impossible, often in conditions that would have stopped most people from even attempting to walk. The daily routine began before dawn with meditation and breathing exercises, designed to create a mental state that Dr. Vasquez called the flow beyond pain. This was followed by runs that might cover anywhere from 20 to 50 miles, depending on the terrain and weather conditions. But these weren't ordinary runs. Dr. Vasquez had developed a technique that involved using the landscape itself as a training partner, learning to read the rhythms of wind and weather, the patterns of light and shadow, the subtle signals that indicated changes in elevation or surface conditions. Maya learned to run in ways that seemed to defy physics, covering ground with an efficiency that conserved energy while maintaining speeds that would have been impossible using conventional techniques. She learned to breathe in patterns that maximized oxygen absorption while minimizing fatigue. Most importantly, she learned to access mental states that allowed her to push through barriers that had previously seemed absolute. The training was not without its costs. Maya's body was pushed to its breaking point repeatedly, resulting in injuries and exhaustion that would have hospitalized most people. The knee injury that appeared in her medical file was only one of several serious problems that required Dr. Vasquez's extensive knowledge of wilderness medicine to treat. But each breakdown was followed by a breakthrough, as Maya's body adapted to demands that seemed impossible. As the months passed, Maya found herself capable of feats that she couldn't fully explain even to herself. She could run marathon distances without significant fatigue, maintain steady paces over terrain that would challenge experienced hikers, and push through pain barriers that had once stopped her completely. But perhaps more importantly, she developed a mental discipline that allowed her to remain calm and focused under extreme stress. Dr. Vasquez eventually revealed the true purpose behind her unconventional training methods. She had been developing a comprehensive system designed to prepare individuals for the kind of extreme endurance challenges that might be encountered in military or emergency response situations. Her own experience as an elite athlete, combined with years of studying traditional endurance techniques from various cultures around the world, had led her to create something entirely new. The older woman had been looking for someone to carry on her work, someone who could take these techniques and apply them in practical situations where lives might depend on superhuman levels of endurance. Maya's quiet determination and natural affinity for the mental aspects of the training made her an ideal candidate. But Dr. Vasquez also recognized that Maya would need to prove herself in conventional settings before anyone would take her seriously. When Maya finally left the cabin and returned to civilization, she carried with her knowledge and abilities that existed nowhere else in the world. But she also understood that revealing the true extent of her training would raise questions that she couldn't answer without betraying Dr. Vasquez's trust. The older woman had made her promise to keep their time together completely secret, at least until Maya had established herself as a credible athlete or military professional. Maya had initially planned to return to college and complete her degree, but her time in the mountains had changed her perspective on what she wanted to do with her life. The academic study of environmental systems seemed less important than the practical application of the skills she had learned. She began to see the military as the perfect testing ground for Dr. Vasquez's techniques, a place where extreme endurance might actually save lives. The decision to enlist had not been easy. Maya knew that she would have to hide her true capabilities, at least initially, to avoid unwanted attention and questions. Dr. Vasquez had warned her that the military establishment would be suspicious of any unconventional training methods, especially ones that couldn't be easily explained or replicated. The plan was for Maya to demonstrate steady improvement over time, gradually revealing her abilities in ways that would seem natural and explainable. But the reality of military training proved more challenging than Maya had anticipated. The constant scrutiny, the skepticism about her abilities, and the pressure to conform to conventional expectations made it difficult to apply the techniques she had learned. Dr. Vasquez's methods required a level of mental quiet and focus that was almost impossible to maintain in the chaotic environment of basic training. Maya found herself having to carefully calibrate her performance, showing enough improvement to avoid being dismissed while not revealing capabilities that would raise suspicions. It was a delicate balance that required constant attention and self-discipline. The morning runs were particularly challenging because her natural pace, developed through months of training in the mountains, was far faster than anything her current performance suggested was possible. The other recruits' mockery and skepticism actually helped provide cover for Maya's deception. Their low expectations meant that any improvement she showed was attributed to gradual conditioning rather than hidden abilities. But the constant negativity was wearing on her. creating stress that made it harder to access the mental states that Dr. Vasquez had taught her to cultivate. Colonel Hendricks continued to puzzle over Maya's file, sensing that there was more to the young woman's story than the official records revealed. The colonel had her own suspicions about unconventional training methods, having encountered rumors during her career about secret programs and experimental techniques that existed outside normal military channels. Maya's combination of obvious struggle and inexplicable persistence reminded Hendricks of stories she had heard about individuals who had undergone extreme conditioning in circumstances that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The breakthrough moment that would change everything was still weeks away, but the foundation was being laid through Maya's careful observation of her fellow recruits and her gradual adaptation to the demands of the program. She was learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of military life while maintaining the mental discipline that Dr. Vasquez had instilled in her. Private Thompson's hostility continued to escalate, but Maya was beginning to recognize it as an opportunity rather than simply an obstacle. Each challenge he presented was a chance to test her abilities in small ways, to measure her progress against the standards that Dr. Vasquez had set for her. The other recruit's skepticism was actually helping to maintain her cover, ensuring that when she finally revealed her true capabilities, the impact would be overwhelming. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would challenge everything the elite forces thought they knew about endurance, determination, and the limits of human performance. Maya Chen, the quiet young woman they had dismissed as weak and unprepared, was about to demonstrate that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. But first, she would have to survive the increasing pressure from her fellow recruits and the growing scrutiny from her commanding officers, all while maintaining the careful facade that protected the secret of those missing 6 months in the Montana wilderness. The turning point came during a routine equipment inspection on a gray Tuesday morning that promised nothing more significant than the usual grinding routine of military life. Maya stood at attention beside her bunk, her gear laid out with the precise spacing that had become second nature after weeks of repetition. The other recruits moved through their own preparations with practiced efficiency, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Word had filtered down through unofficial channels that a major evaluation was coming, something that would determine who would advance to the next phase of training and who would be sent home. Instructor Williams moved down the line of recruits with his usual methodical pace, examining each item with the kind of attention to detail that could find fault with anything if he chose to look hard enough. When he reached Maya's station, he paused longer than usual, his weathered face betraying nothing as he picked up her water bottle and examined it closely. The bottle was standard issue, identical to every other one in the room, but Williams seemed to be studying it as if it contained secrets. What he had noticed, though he gave no outward sign, was the way Maya's hands moved when she thought no one was looking. During the morning run, he had been positioned at a checkpoint where he could observe the recruits as they passed, and something about Maya's breathing pattern had caught his attention. While the others were clearly struggling with the pace, their breathing labored and irregular, Maya's rhythm had been almost meditative, as if she was drawing on some internal reserve that the others lacked. Williams had been training Special Forces candidates for 15 years, and he had developed an instinct for spotting the ones who were hiding something. Sometimes it was weakness they were trying to conceal, fear or doubt that would eventually surface under pressure. But occasionally it was strength they were hiding, abilities that for whatever reason they didn't want to reveal. Maya fell into the latter category, and Williams was determined to find out what she was concealing. The inspection concluded without incident, but Williams made a mental note to observe Maya more closely during the day's training exercises. The scheduled activity was urban warfare simulation, a complex scenario that would test not just physical capabilities, but tactical thinking and adaptability under stress. The exercise would take place in a mock city that had been constructed specifically for training purposes, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and hidden obstacles designed to challenge even experienced soldiers. As the recruits prepared for the simulation, Private Thompson saw an opportunity to continue his campaign of harassment. He had been growing increasingly frustrated with Maya's refusal to react to his provocations, and the upcoming evaluation had made him desperate to find some way to force her out of the program. During the equipment check, he deliberately knocked over her rifle, sending it clattering to the floor and drawing the attention of the instructors. Maya retrieved the weapon without comment, quickly inspecting it for damage before returning it to its proper position. But Thompson wasn't finished. As they moved toward the simulation area, he began making loud comments about how dangerous it was to have unreliable team members in combat situations, how people who couldn't handle basic equipment checks would get everyone killed in real operations. The other recruits were caught between their growing respect for Maya's persistence and their loyalty to Thompson, who had emerged as their unofficial leader. Private Santos found herself particularly conflicted, recognizing the injustice of Thompson's behavior, while still harboring doubts about Maya's actual capabilities. The tension was becoming impossible to ignore, and several recruits began to wonder if the situation would explode before the day was over. Colonel Hendricks had been monitoring the dynamics within the group, and she was becoming increasingly concerned about the potential for the hostility to escalate into something more serious. She had seen promising recruits wash out of programs not because they lacked ability, but because toxic group dynamics had made it impossible for them to perform at their best. Maya's situation was particularly delicate because any intervention on her behalf might be seen as favoritism, potentially undermining her credibility even further. The urban warfare simulation began with the recruits divided into two teams, each tasked with securing specific objectives within the mock city, while avoiding or neutralizing opposing forces. Maya found herself assigned to Thompson's team, a placement that she suspected was not accidental. The instructors wanted to see how the group dynamics would play out under pressure, and pairing her with her primary antagonist was guaranteed to create interesting results. The simulation scenario involved a hostage rescue operation in a building complex that had been taken over by enemy forces. Maya's team was responsible for securing the perimeter and providing support, while the primary assault team moved in to extract the hostages. It was a role that should have been straightforward, requiring mainly observation and communication rather than direct combat engagement. But Thompson had other plans. As soon as the exercise began, he started giving Maya assignments that were clearly designed to isolate her from the rest of the team and put her in unnecessarily dangerous positions. He sent her to check alleyways that were obvious ambush points, assigned her to carry extra equipment that would slow her down, and generally treated her as expendable rather than as a valuable team member. Maya accepted each assignment without protest, but she was beginning to recognize that Thompson's behavior was creating genuine tactical problems for the team. His focus on harassing her was distracting him from the actual objectives of the exercise, and his decisions were becoming increasingly irrational. She began to realize that the simulation might provide an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in a way that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. The breakthrough moment came when Thompson assigned Maya to conduct reconnaissance on a building that intelligence suggested was heavily defended. It was clearly a suicide mission, the kind of assignment that would normally require a full team with extensive support. Thompson presented it as a routine scouting operation, but everyone understood what he was really doing. He was trying to create a situation where Maya would either refuse the order, providing grounds for disciplinary action, or accept it and fail spectacularly. Maya studied the building through her scope, noting the defensive positions and the patterns of movement that indicated enemy presence. But she was also assessing something else, calculating distances and routes, with the kind of precision that came from months of training in terrain that made this simulation look like a children's playground. The techniques that Dr. Vasquez had taught her were finally applicable in a practical situation, and Maya felt a familiar calm settling over her as she prepared to move. What happened next defied every assumption that the instructors and other recruits had made about Maya's capabilities. Instead of the careful, methodical approach they expected from someone of her apparent skill level, Maya moved through the simulation environment with a fluidity and speed that seemed almost impossible. She covered ground in ways that the observers couldn't quite follow, using angles and approaches that weren't part of standard tactical doctrine. Within minutes, Maya had not only completed the reconnaissance mission, but had also identified weaknesses in the enemy defensive positions that the tactical planners had missed. Her movement through the building complex was so efficient that she was able to gather intelligence on multiple targets while remaining completely undetected. When she returned to report her findings, Thompson was visibly shocked, clearly having expected her to either fail or be eliminated from the exercise. But Maya's performance in the simulation was just the beginning of what would become a series of revelations about her true capabilities. Instructor Williams had been watching her movements through surveillance equipment, and what he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about human performance under stress. Maya's heart rate had remained remarkably stable throughout the mission. Her breathing patterns had been consistent with someone engaged in light exercise rather than high-stress combat operations, and her decision-making had shown a level of tactical sophistication that was completely at odds with her official training record. The simulation continued for several more hours, with Maya consistently outperforming expectations while maintaining the facade of being just competent enough to avoid attention. But the careful balance she had maintained for weeks was beginning to break down under the pressure of Thompson's escalating harassment and the demands of the increasingly complex training scenarios. During the final phase of the exercise, which involved a coordinated assault on the main objective building, Thompson made a decision that crossed the line from harassment into outright sabotage. As Maya was moving into position to provide covering fire for the assault team, Thompson deliberately triggered an explosive device that was meant to simulate enemy fire. The blast was close enough to cause real injury, and Maya found herself thrown against a concrete wall with enough force to knock the wind out of her. For a moment, as Maya lay on the ground struggling to catch her breath, something shifted inside her. The careful control that she had maintained for weeks began to crack, as she felt the training that Dr. Vasquez had instilled in her rising to the surface. The older woman had taught her that there were times when concealment was more dangerous than revelation, when hiding one's true capabilities could lead to disaster for everyone involved. Maya stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the impact she had just absorbed. The other recruits were watching her, expecting to see signs of injury or disorientation. Instead, they saw something that none of them could quite identify, a quality in her posture and expression that suggested reserves of strength and determination that they hadn't suspected existed. What followed was a performance that would be analyzed and discussed by the training staff for months afterward. Maya completed the assault mission not just successfully, but with a level of precision and efficiency that redefined what the instructors thought was possible. She moved through the building complex like someone who had been doing urban warfare for years, anticipating enemy positions and neutralizing threats with minimal effort. But it was her endurance that truly set her apart from the other recruits. While they were showing clear signs of fatigue after hours of intensive simulation, Maya seemed to be drawing energy from some inexhaustible source. Her movements remained fluid and controlled, her decision-making stayed sharp, and her communication with the team was clear and concise even under extreme pressure. Thompson watched Maya's performance with growing alarm, realizing that his attempts to sabotage her had instead provided her with an opportunity to demonstrate abilities that made him look incompetent by comparison. The other recruits were beginning to understand that they had been completely wrong about Maya's capabilities, and the dynamic within the group was shifting in ways that threatened Thompson's position as the unofficial leader. Colonel Hendricks observed the simulation from the command center, her suspicions about Maya confirmed in ways that raised even more questions about the young woman's background. The performance she was witnessing was consistent with someone who had received extensive specialized training, the kind of preparation that took years to develop and required resources that weren't available through normal channels. The colonel began to piece together a theory about Maya's missing 6 months, suspecting that the young woman had somehow gained access to training that existed outside the official military structure. There were rumors about private contractors and former special forces operators who provided specialized instruction to individuals with the resources and connections to access their services. Maya clearly didn't have the financial means for such training, but there were other ways to gain access to elite instruction. As the simulation concluded, Maya found herself in an unexpected position. Her performance had been impossible to ignore or dismiss, but it had also created new problems. The other recruits were looking at her with a mixture of respect and suspicion, wondering how someone who had struggled with basic exercises just weeks earlier could suddenly demonstrate such advanced capabilities. Thompson's reaction was particularly concerning. His earlier harassment had been motivated by a desire to maintain his dominance within the group, but now it was fueled by genuine fear that Maya's emergence as a capable operator would expose his own limitations. The situation was becoming potentially dangerous, and Maya realized that she would need to be extremely careful about how she proceeded. The debriefing session that followed the simulation was unlike anything Maya had experienced during her time at Fort Blackwater. Instead of the usual group discussion and critique, she found herself called into a private meeting with Colonel Hendricks and Instructor Williams. The two senior officers had clearly been discussing her performance in detail, And they had questions that Maya wasn't sure she could answer without revealing information that she had promised to keep secret. Colonel Hendricks began the conversation by reviewing Maya's official training record, pointing out the discrepancies between her documented capabilities and what they had just witnessed. She asked direct questions about where Maya had learned the techniques she had demonstrated, who had provided her training, and why she had chosen to conceal her abilities during the earlier phases of the program. Maya found herself in an impossible position. Dr. Vasquez had made her promise to protect the secret of their training relationship, but continuing to maintain that deception was becoming increasingly difficult. The techniques she had learned were too distinctive to be explained away as natural talent or conventional preparation, and the instructors were clearly sophisticated enough to recognize specialized training when they saw it. After careful consideration, Maya decided to reveal a carefully edited version of the truth. She admitted that she had received some unconventional training during her time away from college, but she claimed that it had come from a former military instructor who preferred to remain anonymous. She explained that the training had focused on endurance and mental discipline rather than combat techniques, and that she had been gradually learning to apply those lessons to military situations. The explanation was plausible enough to satisfy immediate questions, but Maya could see that Colonel Hendricks remained suspicious. The colonel had enough experience to recognize when someone was holding back important information, and she made it clear that she expected Maya to be more forthcoming as the training program progressed. Instructor Williams took a different approach, focusing on the practical implications of Maya's demonstrated abilities rather than their origins. He pointed out that her performance in the simulation had been impressive but inconsistent with her previous work, and he wanted to understand whether she could maintain that level of capability under different circumstances. The conversation concluded with an agreement that Maya would be given additional opportunities to demonstrate her skills, but under more controlled conditions that would allow the instructors to better assess her true capabilities. It was a compromise that satisfied everyone's immediate needs while leaving larger questions unanswered. As Maya left the meeting, she realized that her careful strategy of gradual revelation had been disrupted by Thompson's sabotage attempt. She was now committed to a path that would require her to demonstrate increasing levels of capability, potentially leading to questions that she still couldn't answer fully. The next phase of her time at Fort Blackwater would be far more challenging than anything she had faced so far. That evening, as the recruits prepared for sleep after the intensive day of training, Maya found herself reflecting on the conversation she had had with Dr. Vasquez before leaving the mountain cabin. The older woman had warned her that there would come a time when maintaining secrecy would become more dangerous than revelation, when the skills she had learned would demand to be used regardless of the consequences. Maya was beginning to understand that she was approaching that critical point. The training program was becoming more demanding, and her fellow recruits were starting to depend on her capabilities in ways that made concealment increasingly difficult. Thompson's hostility was escalating to levels that threatened not just her own safety, but the effectiveness of the entire unit. Most importantly, Maya was starting to recognize that the techniques Dr. Vasquez had taught her were meant to be shared, not hidden. The older woman had developed her methods with the intention of creating a new generation of elite operators who could handle challenges that conventional training couldn't address. Maya was beginning to see herself not just as a student of those techniques, but as their first practical application in a real military environment. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not just Maya's physical capabilities, but her commitment to the principles that Dr. Vasquez had instilled in her. The endurance test that would define her future at Fort Blackwater was still ahead, but the foundation had been laid for a demonstration that would challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about human performance under extreme conditions. Maya closed her eyes and began the breathing exercises that Dr. Vasquez had taught her, feeling her heart rate slow and her mind clear as she prepared for whatever challenges the next day would bring. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had arrived at Fort Blackwater weeks earlier. She was becoming something new, something that the military had never seen before, and the implications of that transformation were only beginning to become clear. The announcement came at 0500 hours on a crisp Friday morning that would forever change the trajectory of Maya's military career. Colonel Hendricks stood before the assembled recruits, her expression grave as she delivered news that sent ripples of anxiety through the formation. A joint training exercise with Allied forces had been scheduled for the following week, and Fort Blackwater had been selected to provide a demonstration team that would showcase the capabilities of their Special Operations Program. The exercise would involve a grueling endurance challenge that had been specifically designed to test the absolute limits of human performance under combat conditions. Teams from 12 different military installations would compete in a multi-stage event that combined long-distance movement, tactical problem-solving, and sustained operations over a 48-hour period. The winning team would receive recognition at the highest levels of military command, while poor performance would reflect badly on the entire installation. Maya felt her pulse quicken as Colonel Hendricks outlined the specific requirements of the challenge. The centerpiece would be a 26-mile movement through mountainous terrain while carrying full combat gear, followed immediately by a series of tactical exercises that would test the participants' ability to function effectively despite extreme fatigue. The entire event would be monitored by senior officers from multiple branches of the military, including some who had the authority to make decisions about the future of the Special Operations Program at Fort Blackwater. The selection process for the demonstration team would be brutal and unforgiving. Every recruit would be required to complete a preliminary endurance test that would eliminate all but the most capable candidates. Those who survived the initial cut would face additional challenges until only 5 individuals remained. The stakes could not have been higher, and Maya understood that her performance over the next week would determine not just her own future, but potentially the fate of everyone in her unit. Private Thompson's reaction to the announcement was immediate and intense. He had been counting on his physical superiority and leadership position to secure his place on the demonstration team, but Maya's recent performance in the urban warfare simulation had shaken his confidence. The thought of competing directly against her in an endurance challenge filled him with a dread that he struggled to conceal behind his usual bravado. Thompson began campaigning immediately to undermine Maya's chances of making the team. He spread rumors about her inconsistent performance record, suggested that her success in the simulation had been due to luck rather than skill, and argued that including her on the team would be a dangerous gamble that could cost Fort Blackwater its reputation. His efforts found some support among recruits who remained skeptical about Maya's capabilities, but others were beginning to recognize the desperation behind his attacks. Private Santos found herself increasingly disturbed by Thompson's behavior, particularly his willingness to sabotage a fellow recruit for personal gain. She had initially shared some of his doubts about Maya's suitability for the program, but the young woman's consistent performance and quiet dignity were earning her respect. Santos began to realize that Thompson's hostility was motivated more by fear of being outperformed than by legitimate concerns about team effectiveness. The preliminary endurance test was scheduled for the following Monday, giving the recruits just 3 days to prepare physically and mentally for what promised to be the most challenging evaluation they had faced. The test would involve a 15-mile run through varied terrain while carrying a 40-pound pack, followed by a series of functional fitness challenges designed to measure their remaining capacity after prolonged exertion. Maya spent those 3 days in careful preparation, not just physically but mentally. She practiced the breathing techniques and visualization exercises that Dr. Vasquez had taught her, working to access the mental states that would allow her to perform at levels that others would find impossible. She also studied the terrain where the test would take place, memorizing elevation changes and identifying points where efficiency of movement would be crucial. But Maya was also grappling with a more fundamental decision about how much of her true capabilities to reveal. The preliminary test would be observed by all the senior instructors, and an overwhelming performance would raise questions that she still wasn't prepared to answer fully. Yet holding back too much might cost her the opportunity to make the demonstration team, potentially ending her military career before it had truly begun. The morning of the preliminary test arrived with weather conditions that could hardly have been more challenging. A cold rain had been falling since midnight, turning the mountain trails into treacherous mud and reducing visibility to just a few dozen yards. The temperature hovered just above freezing, creating conditions that would sap energy and test the mental resilience of even the most prepared candidates. As the recruits assembled at the starting line, Maya noticed that several of her fellow candidates were already showing signs of anxiety about the conditions. Thompson was pacing nervously, his usual confidence clearly shaken by the prospect of competing under such adverse circumstances. Others were making last-minute adjustments to their gear, trying to find configurations that would provide better protection against the elements. Maya stood quietly at the back of the formation, her breathing steady and her expression calm despite the chaos around her. She had learned to welcome difficult conditions rather than fear them, understanding that adverse weather often leveled the playing field by negating some of the advantages that others might have in terms of raw physical power. The techniques that Dr. Vasquez had taught her were specifically designed for situations where conventional approaches would fail. Colonel Hendricks delivered the final briefing with characteristic efficiency, emphasizing that this test would determine not just who made the demonstration team, but who had the potential to succeed in the most demanding special operations roles. She reminded the recruits that they would be judged not just on their finishing times, but on their ability to maintain military bearing and tactical awareness throughout the challenge. The starting signal came without fanfare, and the 23 remaining recruits set off into the gray morning at a pace that Maya immediately recognized as unsustainable for most of them. Thompson had positioned himself at the front of the group, clearly intending to establish dominance from the beginning, but Maya could see that his strategy was driven more by ego than tactical thinking. Maya settled into a position in the middle of the pack, matching the pace of the group, while carefully monitoring her own energy expenditure. She could feel the familiar calm settling over her as the techniques that Dr. Vasquez had drilled into her began to take effect. Her breathing fell into the rhythm that maximized oxygen efficiency, her stride adjusted automatically to the terrain, and her mind began to access the mental state that the older woman had called the flow beyond exhaustion. The first several miles passed through relatively flat terrain, allowing the faster runners to establish significant leads over those who were struggling with the pace. Maya maintained her position in the middle of the group, but she was beginning to notice something that the others seemed to miss. Several of the leaders were already showing signs of inefficient movement patterns that would cost them dearly as the course became more challenging. Thompson was pushing an aggressive pace that was clearly beyond his sustainable capacity, his breathing already labored, and his form beginning to deteriorate. Other strong runners were making similar mistakes, allowing their competitive instincts to override tactical thinking about energy management. Maya recognized that the real test would begin when the course turned upward into the mountains, where efficiency would matter more than raw speed. The transition came at mile 7, where the relatively gentle terrain gave way to steep switchbacks that climbed nearly 2,000 feet over the next 4 miles. This was where Maya had expected the field to begin spreading out significantly, and she was not disappointed. The leaders who had been setting the aggressive early pace found themselves struggling to maintain forward progress as the combination of elevation, load, and accumulated fatigue began to take its toll. Maya began to move up through the field as others faltered, but she was careful to make her progress appear gradual and natural rather than dramatic. She passed runners who were clearly in distress, offering quiet words of encouragement that seemed to help them maintain their focus. Her own breathing remained controlled, her movement efficient, and her awareness of the surrounding terrain acute. Thompson was among those who were struggling most severely with the elevation gain. His early sprint had cost him dearly, and he was now paying the price in terms of muscle fatigue and cardiovascular stress. Maya passed him at mile 9, noting that his face was flushed red with exertion, and his breathing was becoming increasingly irregular. He tried to stay with her pace, but it was clear that he lacked the reserves necessary to match her sustained effort. By mile 12, Maya had moved into 3rd place behind 2 recruits who had been running competitively before joining the military. Both were clearly talented athletes with extensive endurance backgrounds, but Maya could see that they were beginning to reach their limits as the combination of load, terrain, and conditions continued to exact its toll. She was, by contrast, feeling stronger than she had at any point since the test began. The breakthrough moment came at mile 14, where the course took the runners through a particularly challenging section of rocky terrain that required careful foot placement and constant attention to balance. Maya's training in the mountains of Montana had prepared her perfectly for these conditions, and she began to pull away from the field with a display of efficiency and control that left the observers struggling to understand what they were witnessing. Instructor Williams was monitoring the race from a checkpoint at mile 15, and what he saw challenged every assumption he had made about human performance under extreme conditions. Maya approached his position moving at a pace that should have been impossible given the distance already covered and the conditions she had endured. More importantly, her form remained perfect. Her breathing was controlled, and she showed no signs of the deterioration that typically marked runners who were approaching their limits. Williams immediately radioed ahead to Colonel Hendricks, who was positioned at the finish line. His report was terse but contained information that would have seemed impossible if it had come from anyone else. Maya was not just winning the race. She was winning it by margins that defied explanation, and she appeared to be getting stronger rather than weaker as the distance increased. Colonel Hendricks received the radio report with a mixture of excitement and concern. Maya's performance was exactly what Fort Blackwater needed for the upcoming demonstration, but it also raised questions about her background that could not be ignored indefinitely. The kind of endurance capability that Williams was describing typically took years of specialized training to develop, and Maya's official records contained no indication that she had access to such preparation. Maya completed the 15-mile run nearly 8 minutes ahead of the second-place finisher, a margin that would have been impressive in a civilian race, but was unprecedented in a military endurance test conducted under such challenging conditions. But the preliminary test was only half completed. The functional fitness challenges that followed would determine whether she could maintain her capabilities while performing specific military tasks. The post-run evaluations were designed to simulate the kinds of activities that special operations personnel might be required to perform immediately after long-distance movement. They included weapons handling, tactical communication, and problem-solving exercises that required fine motor control and mental acuity. Most recruits found these tasks extremely difficult after the exhaustion of the run, but Maya approached them with the same calm efficiency that had characterized her running performance. Her performance on the post-run evaluations was, if anything, even more impressive than her dominance during the endurance portion of the test. While other recruits struggled with shaking hands and clouded thinking, Maya's precision remained unchanged. Her weapons handling was crisp, her communication was clear, and her problem-solving was rapid and accurate. It was as if the preceding 15 miles had been nothing more than a warm-up exercise. Thompson finished the run in 11th place, his early pace having cost him any chance of making the demonstration team. His disappointment was evident, but it was mixed with a growing recognition that Maya's capabilities were far beyond anything he had imagined. The harassment and sabotage that had seemed like reasonable tactics when he believed her to be weak now appeared foolish and counterproductive. The final results of the preliminary test eliminated all doubt about Maya's place on the demonstration team. She had not just qualified, she had established herself as the clear leader and the recruit most likely to excel in the upcoming inter-unit competition. But her dominant performance had also created new challenges, as the attention she was receiving from senior officers intensified their interest in understanding the source of her exceptional abilities. Colonel Hendricks called Maya into another private meeting that afternoon, this time accompanied by Major Patricia Walsh, the officer who would be leading the demonstration team. Major Walsh had an extensive background in special operations and had competed in several military endurance events at the highest levels. Her presence at the meeting indicated that Maya's performance had attracted attention from outside the normal training command structure. Major Walsh began the conversation by reviewing video footage of Maya's performance during the preliminary test, pointing out specific moments where her technique and efficiency had been particularly noteworthy. She asked detailed questions about Maya's training background, her experience with long-distance movement, and her familiarity with the specific demands of military endurance challenges. Maya found herself in an even more difficult position than she had faced during previous interrogations about her background. Major Walsh's questions were more sophisticated and specific than anything she had encountered before, clearly coming from someone who had extensive personal experience with elite endurance training. The carefully edited version of the truth that had satisfied earlier inquiries was unlikely to be sufficient for this level of scrutiny. After careful consideration, Maya decided to reveal more details about her time with Dr. Vasquez, though she continued to protect the older woman's identity and location. She explained that her unconventional training had focused specifically on developing sustainable endurance capabilities for extreme conditions, and that the techniques she had learned were based on methods that existed outside mainstream athletic and military training programs. Major Walsh listened to Maya's explanation with growing interest, recognizing descriptions of training methods that she had heard rumors about but never encountered directly. There were stories within the special operations community about former elite athletes and innovative coaches who had developed techniques that produced extraordinary results. But such individuals typically worked only with athletes who had the resources and connections to access their services. The conversation concluded with Major Walsh expressing satisfaction with Maya's potential contribution to the demonstration team, but also making it clear that she expected complete honesty about any factors that might affect Maya's performance during the upcoming competition. Maya agreed to these terms, though she remained concerned about how much more scrutiny her background could withstand. As Maya left the meeting, she realized that her carefully managed revelation of capabilities had reached a critical point. The demonstration team competition would place her in a spotlight that would make further concealment extremely difficult, if not impossible. The techniques that Dr. Vasquez had taught her were about to be tested at the highest levels of military competition, and the results would determine not just her own future, but potentially the recognition of an entirely new approach to human performance optimization. The days leading up to the inter-unit competition passed in intensive preparation, with the demonstration team members working together to develop strategies and tactics for the various components of the challenge. Maya found herself in the unusual position of being both the team's strongest performer and its most mysterious member, a combination that created complex dynamics within the group. The other team members included Private Santos, who had earned her place through consistent performance and tactical intelligence, Sergeant Kevin Morrison, a veteran with extensive combat experience, Private Jake Sullivan, whose technical skills complemented his physical capabilities, and Corporal Lisa Chang, whose leadership abilities had impressed the selection committee. Each brought specific strengths to the team, but Maya's endurance capabilities were clearly the foundation on which their competitive strategy would be built. The stage was set for a competition that would test not just individual capabilities, but the team's ability to function as a cohesive unit under extreme stress. Maya understood that the upcoming challenge would require her to demonstrate the full extent of her abilities, potentially revealing secrets that she had spent months protecting. The careful balance between concealment and performance that had defined her time at Fort Blackwater was about to give way to the demands of representing her unit at the highest levels of military competition. The morning of the inter-unit competition dawned clear and cold, with a crystalline sky that promised perfect visibility for the dozens of senior officers who had gathered to observe what many considered the most demanding endurance challenge in military training. Representatives from 12 elite units had assembled at the remote mountain facility, each team carrying the hopes and reputation of their respective installations. The atmosphere was electric with competitive tension and the knowledge that careers would be made or broken based on the day's performance. Maya stood with her teammates at the edge of the staging area, her breathing steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The 26-mile course stretched before them through some of the most challenging terrain in the region, climbing over 8,000 feet of cumulative elevation gain while traversing ridges, valleys, and technical sections that would test every aspect of endurance and tactical skill. Each competitor would carry 60 pounds of combat gear, including weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, and communication equipment that must remain functional throughout the entire challenge. Major Walsh delivered the final briefing to the Fort Blackwater team, her voice calm but intense as she outlined their strategy for the competition. The plan was built around Maya's exceptional endurance capabilities, with the other team members supporting her while maintaining their own performance standards. But Walsh had also prepared contingency plans in case Maya's abilities proved insufficient for the extreme demands they were about to face. The competing teams represented the absolute pinnacle of military fitness and training. The group from Fort Braxton included 3 former Olympic-level athletes who had transitioned into special operations roles. The team from Naval Special Warfare had members with combat experience in the world's most challenging environments. The Marines had sent their most elite reconnaissance specialists, individuals whose reputation for toughness was legendary even within military circles. As Maya surveyed the competition, she felt the familiar calm that Dr. Vasquez had taught her to cultivate in moments of extreme challenge. The older woman's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that true endurance was not about conquering others, but about transcending the limitations that the mind imposed on the body. The techniques she had learned in the Montana wilderness were about to face their ultimate test against the best military athletes in the world. General Patricia Morrison, the senior officer overseeing the competition, stepped forward to address the assembled teams. Her presence indicated the importance that military leadership placed on the event, and her words carried the weight of institutional authority. She emphasized that the competition was not just about individual achievement, but about demonstrating the effectiveness of different training methodologies and identifying approaches that could enhance the capabilities of special operations forces across all branches. The starting signal echoed across the mountain valley, and 60 of the military's most elite athletes began the most demanding challenge of their careers. The initial pace was conservative, with most teams recognizing that the true test would come in the later stages. when accumulated fatigue would separate those with genuine endurance from those who had simply trained for shorter distances. Maya settled into a rhythm that felt almost meditative, her breathing synchronized with her footsteps in patterns that Dr. Vasquez had taught her to associate with sustainable, high-level performance. Her teammates moved with her in a coordinated formation that maximized their collective efficiency while allowing each individual to maintain optimal pacing. The strategy was working exactly as Major Walsh had planned, with the Fort Blackwater team maintaining a position in the top third of the field while conserving energy for the challenges ahead. The first major test came at mile 8, where the course began a sustained climb that would gain 3,000 feet of elevation over the next 6 miles. This was where many teams had historically struggled, as the combination of altitude, grade, and accumulated load began to exact a serious toll on cardiovascular systems that were already working at maximum capacity. Maya began to move through the field as other competitors started to show signs of distress. Her pace remained steady and sustainable, but her efficiency of movement was beginning to set her apart from even the most accomplished athletes in the competition. She climbed the technical sections with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics, her energy expenditure remaining minimal, while others struggled with the increasingly demanding terrain. The Fort Braxton team, which had been setting an aggressive early pace, began to fall back as their Olympic-level athletes discovered that track and field excellence did not necessarily translate to success in mountain endurance challenges. Their training had been optimized for shorter distances in controlled conditions, leaving them vulnerable to the sustained demands and environmental variables that characterize this competition. By mile 12, Maya had moved into the lead position, but she was being careful not to open too large a gap that might demoralize her teammates or attract unnecessary attention from observers. She maintained radio communication with her team, providing guidance and encouragement that helped them sustain performance levels that exceeded their previous capabilities. The breakthrough moment that would define the competition came at mile 15, where an unexpected crisis threatened to derail not just individual performances, but the safety of everyone involved. A severe weather system had moved into the area faster than meteorologists had predicted, bringing with it conditions that transformed the already challenging course into something approaching survival situation. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in less than an hour, accompanied by winds that gusted to over 50 miles per hour and visibility that decreased to less than 50 yards. Several teams immediately called for extraction, recognizing that continuing under such conditions would be dangerous regardless of competitive considerations. But others, including the Fort Blackwater team, made the decision to press forward despite the deteriorating situation. Maya found herself in a position where the techniques that Dr. Vasquez had taught her were not just advantageous but essential for survival. The older woman's training had been specifically designed for extreme conditions, based on her understanding that real-world applications of endurance would inevitably involve environmental challenges that could not be controlled or predicted. As the storm intensified, Maya began to demonstrate capabilities that transcended anything the observers had imagined possible. She navigated through near-whiteout conditions with a precision that seemed almost supernatural, finding routes through the terrain that others missed entirely. Her ability to maintain pace and direction despite the complete loss of visual reference points suggested a level of environmental awareness that went beyond conventional navigation skills. More importantly, Maya began to function as a lifeline for other competitors who were struggling with the conditions. She guided lost teams back to the correct route, shared navigation information that helped others maintain their bearings, and provided assistance to individuals who were showing signs of hypothermia or altitude-related distress. The Fort Blackwater team, anchored by Maya's exceptional performance, began to establish a commanding lead over the field. But Maya was also taking on responsibilities that went beyond competitive considerations, effectively becoming a rescue resource for anyone who needed assistance, regardless of their team affiliation. General Morrison, monitoring the competition from a heated command post, found herself witnessing something that challenged her understanding of human performance under extreme conditions. The reports she was receiving from course monitors described Maya's performance in terms that seemed almost impossible, particularly her ability to maintain both speed and situational awareness while operating in conditions that had forced other elite athletes to seek shelter. At mile 20, Maya made a decision that would be remembered and analyzed for years afterward. A competitor from the Naval Special Warfare Team had become separated from his group during the height of the storm and was showing clear signs of severe hypothermia. Standard competitive protocol would have been to report the situation to course officials and continue with the race, but Maya recognized that the individual was in immediate danger and that rescue personnel might not be able to reach him in time. Maya deviated from the course to provide assistance, using techniques that Dr. Vasquez had taught her for treating cold-weather injuries in remote environments. She improvised shelter using available materials, shared her own equipment to help stabilize the affected individual's condition, and maintained radio communication with race officials to coordinate a rescue that ultimately saved the competitor's life. The decision to stop and provide aid cost Maya nearly 40 minutes, a delay that would normally have eliminated any chance of winning the competition. But when she resumed the race, carrying additional weight from equipment she had given to the rescued individual, she began a display of endurance capability that redefined what the observers thought was humanly possible. Maya covered the final 6 miles at a pace that would have been impressive at the beginning of the race, let alone after 20 miles of extreme conditions while carrying a full combat load. Her movement through the challenging final section was so efficient and sustained that course monitors initially suspected their timing equipment was malfunctioning. She crossed the finish line not just as the individual winner, but with a performance margin that was unprecedented in the history of military endurance competitions. Her time would have been remarkable under perfect conditions with minimal load, but accomplished under the circumstances she had faced. It represented a paradigm shift in understanding of human performance potential. But Maya's victory was about more than personal achievement. Her teammates, inspired and guided by her performance, also finished with exceptional results that elevated Fort Blackwater to the team championship. More significantly, her actions during the race had potentially saved lives and demonstrated a level of character that impressed even the most hardened military observers. The post-race interviews and debriefings created a media sensation that extended far beyond military circles. Maya found herself facing questions from reporters, sports scientists, and military researchers who wanted to understand the source of her exceptional capabilities. The secret that she had protected for months was becoming impossible to maintain under the intense scrutiny that followed her performance. General Morrison personally conducted Maya's official debriefing, asking detailed questions about her training background and the techniques she had used during the competition. The conversation was respectful but persistent, reflecting the military's institutional need to understand and potentially replicate any training methods that could produce such extraordinary results. Maya realized that the time for partial truths and careful concealment had passed. The performance she had demonstrated was too exceptional to be explained by conventional training methods, and the military's interest in understanding her capabilities was both legitimate and inevitable. After careful consideration, she made the decision to reveal the full truth about her time with Dr. Vasquez. The revelation created a sensation within military training circles. Dr. Vasquez's reputation as a former Olympic athlete was well known, but her disappearance from competitive athletics had created mysteries about what she had been doing during her years of exile. Maya's account of the training methods she had learned provided insights into techniques that military researchers had theorized about but never encountered in practice. Major Walsh immediately began working with Maya to document the training techniques she had learned, recognizing their potential application to special operations preparation. The methods that Dr. Vasquez had developed represented a synthesis of traditional endurance training, cutting-edge sports science, and mental discipline techniques that could revolutionize military fitness standards. But Maya's emergence as a public figure also created challenges that she had not anticipated. The attention she received was overwhelming and often intrusive, threatening to disrupt the quiet focus that had been essential to her development as an athlete and soldier. She began to understand why Dr. Vasquez had chosen isolation, recognizing that public scrutiny could be as challenging as any physical test. The military's response to Maya's revelations was swift and comprehensive. A research team was assembled to study her training methods and evaluate their potential for wider application. Dr. Vasquez was contacted and eventually agreed to serve as a consultant for the development of new endurance training protocols that could enhance the capabilities of special operations forces. Maya found herself in the unprecedented position of being both a student and a teacher, learning to adapt Dr. Vasquez's individualized training methods for use with larger groups, while continuing to develop her own capabilities. The role required her to move beyond pure performance toward leadership and instruction, skills that came naturally but demanded different types of preparation. Thompson, whose harassment had inadvertently contributed to Maya's development by forcing her to conceal and refine her abilities, requested a private meeting to apologize for his behavior. The conversation was awkward but genuine, with Thompson acknowledging that his actions had been motivated by insecurity and fear rather than legitimate concerns about team effectiveness. Maya accepted his apology with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her response to his earlier harassment. She recognized that Thompson's behavior had actually helped prepare her for the scrutiny and challenges she would face as her abilities became public knowledge. In a strange way, his antagonism had been a form of training that strengthened her resolve and refined her character. The competition results were formally announced at a ceremony attended by senior officers from across the military establishment. Maya received recognition not just for her individual achievement, but for her demonstration of values and character that exemplified the highest standards of military service. Her decision to prioritize human life over competitive success had impressed observers who had seen too many athletes prioritize winning over honor. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from her teammates, who credited Maya's leadership and example with elevating their own performances to levels they had never achieved before. The Fort Blackwater team's success was a collective achievement that demonstrated the power of exceptional individuals to inspire others to transcend their perceived limitations. Maya's story became a case study in military training programs, but more importantly, it became an inspiration for individuals who faced seemingly impossible challenges in their own lives. Her journey from struggling recruit to elite performer demonstrated that human potential was far greater than most people imagined, and that with proper training and unwavering determination, extraordinary achievements were possible. As Maya stood on the podium receiving recognition for her historic performance, she thought about Dr. Vasquez and the lessons that had made everything possible. The older woman had taught her that true strength came not from conquering others, but from discovering and developing the unlimited potential that existed within every individual. Maya had not just won a competition, she had proven that the boundaries that people accepted as absolute were often nothing more than illusions waiting to be transcended. The legacy of Maya's achievement extended far beyond the immediate recognition she received. Her performance had demonstrated new possibilities for human endurance that would influence military training, competitive athletics, and scientific understanding of physiological limits for years to come. But most importantly, she had shown that with dedication, proper guidance, and unwavering commitment to values greater than personal success, individuals could achieve things that others considered impossible. Maya Chen had arrived at Fort Blackwater as an unknown recruit whose capabilities were dismissed and underestimated by almost everyone around her. She left as a recognized leader whose achievements had redefined understanding of human potential and whose character had earned the respect of the military's most elite communities. Her journey was a testament to the transformative power of hidden strength, patient development, and the courage to reveal one's true capabilities when the moment demanded nothing less than excellence. 2 years later, Maya stood at the entrance of the newly established Endurance Excellence Institute, a facility that had been created specifically to develop and teach the revolutionary training methods she had brought to light. The building bore no resemblance to traditional military training facilities, its design incorporating natural elements that reflected Dr. Vasquez's philosophy about the connection between human performance and environmental harmony. Maya had been promoted to captain and given unprecedented authority to develop training programs that challenged conventional wisdom about human limitations. The institute attracted candidates from elite units worldwide, all seeking to understand and master the techniques that had produced such extraordinary results. But Maya remained selective about who gained access to the deepest levels of the training, understanding that such power required exceptional character and unwavering commitment to service above self. Dr. Vasquez emerged from her mountain exile to serve as the Institute's chief consultant, finally ready to share knowledge that she had developed in solitude. The older woman had been deeply moved by Maya's decision to risk her competitive success to save another person's life, recognizing in that choice the values that she had hoped to instill through her teachings. Their partnership represented the culmination of years of patient development and the beginning of a new chapter in military training philosophy. The first graduating class of the Institute included soldiers, emergency responders, and rescue specialists from 23 different countries. Each had been transformed by training that pushed them beyond what they had believed possible, but more importantly, they had been shaped by Maya's example of leadership through quiet strength and selfless service. Thompson appeared at Maya's office door one afternoon, wearing the insignia of a newly commissioned officer. His transformation had been as dramatic as anyone's, moving from a position of insecurity and hostility to become one of Maya's most dedicated supporters. He had requested assignment to the Institute specifically to work under her guidance, recognizing that his earlier antagonism had inadvertently contributed to her development by forcing her to develop resilience and character under pressure. Maya assigned him to lead a special program for candidates who were struggling with the mental aspects of endurance training, understanding that his own experience with failure and redemption made him uniquely qualified to help others overcome their limitations. Thompson embraced the role with enthusiasm that surprised even Maya, proving that people could change when given the right opportunity and guidance. The Institute's influence extended far beyond military applications. Athletes from around the world sought Maya's guidance, but she remained focused on training individuals whose work served purposes greater than personal achievement. The techniques that Dr. Vasquez had developed were too powerful to be used merely for competitive advantage. They were meant to enhance human capabilities in service of protecting and helping others. Maya's personal life had found balance in ways she had never expected. She maintained the quiet strength that had always defined her, but she had also learned to accept recognition and responsibility without losing the humility that made her effective as a leader. Her relationship with Dr. Vasquez had evolved into a partnership of equals, with each contributing unique perspectives to the ongoing development of their training philosophy. On quiet evenings, Maya would sometimes return to the mountain trails where her extraordinary journey had begun, running alone through terrain that had once seemed impossibly challenging. The distances that had once pushed her to her limits now felt like gentle exercise, but she understood that the real transformation had not been physical. She had learned to access reserves of strength and determination that existed within everyone, waiting to be discovered by those willing to push beyond apparent limitations. Letters arrived regularly from individuals whose lives had been changed by the training programs Maya had developed. Emergency responders who had saved lives because they could maintain peak performance under extreme stress, military personnel who had completed missions that others considered impossible, rescue specialists who had reached people in situations where conventional capabilities would have fallen short. Each story reinforced Maya's understanding that her achievement in that historic competition had been just the beginning. The real victory was not in crossing a finish line first, but in developing and sharing knowledge that enhanced human capability in service of others. The techniques that had seemed like personal secrets were actually tools meant to be shared with anyone willing to embrace the discipline and dedication required to master them. Maya established a scholarship program that provided training opportunities for individuals who lacked the resources to access the Institute's programs on their own. She remembered her own humble background and wanted to ensure that exceptional potential would not be wasted simply because someone lacked financial means or official connections. Dr. Vasquez began documenting their complete training methodology in a comprehensive manual that would preserve their knowledge for future generations. The work was painstaking and detailed, but both women understood its importance for ensuring that the techniques they had developed would continue to benefit others long after their own careers had ended. The annual endurance competition that had launched Maya's public recognition continued to grow in prestige and participation, but it had evolved beyond simple athletic contest. It now served as a proving ground for new training methods and a celebration of values that prioritized service and character over pure competitive achievement. Maya often served as a mentor to young competitors, but she was careful never to push anyone to reveal capabilities they were not ready to demonstrate. She understood from personal experience the importance of allowing individuals to discover their own paths to excellence, providing guidance and support without removing the personal journey that made achievement meaningful. The Institute's reputation attracted attention from researchers studying the outer limits of human performance, but Maya was selective about which studies she supported. She insisted that any research must prioritize practical applications that served humanitarian purposes rather than mere academic curiosity about exceptional capabilities. Years of success had not changed Maya's essential nature. She remained the quiet, determined individual who had endured months of mockery and harassment while developing the strength to transcend every limitation that others had tried to impose on her. But she had also become something more, a leader whose example inspired others to discover reserves of capability they had never imagined they possessed. Maya's final reflection was simple but profound. She had learned that true strength was not about proving superiority over others, but about developing the capability to serve purposes greater than oneself. The endurance that mattered most was not physical, but the persistence required to maintain values and commitment when faced with challenges that tested character as much as capability. The legacy continued to grow, carried forward by every individual who learned to push beyond perceived limitations in service of others. Maya Chen had shown the world that the greatest victories came not from defeating opponents, but from discovering and sharing the unlimited potential that existed within every person willing to embrace the disciplines required for true excellence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.